Alright, time for another DraftPhysics.com, DebatePhysics.com, I don't know, LearningPhysics.com. Yeah, I should, anyway, something like that, right? But what's the point? There's no point in having web addresses on the internet because there's no index of the internet, so no one can ever find them. Because Google is a marketing company and it doesn't work. Yeah, corporate internet isn't a great idea. Corporate run internet. Anyway, it's like corporate run library wouldn't work. But people aren't smart enough to figure that one out. And yet, the peasants wish to argue physics, you know, without doing any thinking about it really, or research, or any of that kind of crap. So anyway, quick release is the subject of this particular video, and magnets as a quick release mechanism, question mark. Yeah, it's an open question. It's really just about how fast you make any connection something has to friction, how fast you eliminate the friction. This is what you're really arguing. So how long does it take, and how much does it matter? And so the simple argument is the more pressure you've built up behind a valve, then it's harder to open the valve and get all of the pressure, because it starts to leak. And so the idea is you want a valve that just kind of gets out of the way entirely, and all of a sudden you go from 90 pounds per square inch of pressure resisting to 0 pounds per inch pressure resisting. So it's just about how quick you remove the stopper, so to speak. Those kind of analogies work well enough, and we can understand that in lots of respects mechanically we're too inept, and so that's why they use things like a string with tension, a very thin little tiny wire or something, and you just break that, because it breaks very quickly and completely. You could argue it doesn't do a lot of stretching or other kind of movement, it just breaks fast. And so you go from full resistance to 0 resistance in an instant, and that's sort of the ideal you're looking for. So whether magnets are a good idea, I would argue that I tend to say no. I haven't seen the video yet. Electromagnets, maybe, because as I learned, by watching physics videos, somebody was using an electromagnet to lift iron filings, and the iron filings did, as soon as you turn off the juice, they fell off. It wasn't, there was very little time measured on the oscilloscope between the time you demagnetized, stopped the electricity, and the time that the magnet was completely unmagnetic. Very little residual, which I thought there would be. I thought it would stay a little bit magnetic for a little while, but it's really quick. So electromagnets, maybe. Regular magnets, probably not, because you're still going to have to disengage them physically. You're going to have to physically move them from one place to another, and that's a whole nother acceleration argument, because you have to accelerate the magnet, and therefore it's going to accelerate slow at the beginning and then go faster and faster. So it's probably not going to be an ideal choice, but whatever. Let's see what he's talking about.
Okay, so I think I've got some kind of a quick release mechanism, and it's with magnets. So what I've done is I've placed a magnet on the card, I've attached a magnet to the card, and then we have a rubber band, and then we have another magnet, and they are facing each other with their north and south pole, so they will attract. But I need some kind of a plate in between it, because the force will be too strong. And so I've used this as a plate.
So I don't even understand why he would bother with this, right? You could just make a loop of thread, just make a bunch of thread loops on, say, a round jar. They're basically the same size, knot them well, and break them. So yeah, it's a little extra work, it takes a little time, but this magnet thing, I don't think so.
Which is a Game Boy game, it's a Harry Potter game, which is going to help me performing the magic. So
toys everywhere, okay.
Yeah, I need this because the force will be too strong. So what I'm going to do is, so now, see, they are attracting each other in the magnets, and I'm going to slowly pull this plate.
So the pressure that's applied between the two magnets, you're saying, is always going to be consistent, pushing through that rubber band and the plastic thing. So any tilt to the plastic is going to change the thickness. Lots of things are going to change how much thickness there is between the two magnets. So it's not going to give you consistent results.
To this direction, and at a certain point the force of which I'm pulling, that I'm pulling with, will become greater than the force of the magnets attracting. Will become greater than the
So, and you
attracting
can
force.
imagine they'd have to be perfectly aligned. The two magnets would have to be the same alignment each time you do the experiment. So each time you'd have to get them to attract, you know, really close. So if you started here, it would slide down maybe, but it's not always going to be perfect. I mean, the magnets will help because they will attract each other and try to always be as completely connected to each other as possible.
Now I have to do it slowly. There we go. Because if I do it faster, we will have different timings. I will have to do it as slow as possible.
So right there, you've already detected a problem. Now at least he has the timing gate further away now, so that was the second big problem with his initial experiment. And then the third one is we don't even know where the cards are passing through the light when they don't have a card on them. So I guess he will be using cards going through the timing gate, so I guess that'll be better. But yes, clearly the gate has to be far enough away where it's not measuring acceleration, it's measuring velocity, because those two numbers are going to be different. Acceleration is going to be an average, okay? Velocity is going to be a consistent, it has it already thing.
Now I will have to do it with both hands. I will show you from above a couple of times. Okay, so now the timer is on. I'm going to pull this back as slowly as possible. First set the gate, go the gate a little bit straight. Slowly, very slowly, until it releases.
Very exciting so
Hold
far.
on. Alright, so if you look at the timing, we have 2:11. Yes, it's 2:11. Let's do another try. Second try. Slowly.
Now, I guess I'd sort of argue that that is more work, okay, than just tying a string to a nail behind it and then just cutting the string.
Alright, so 2:26. Another try. There we go. Alright. 2:13. So it all depends on how
So it's not great. I mean, 226 and 213. Yeah, that's not great. So anyway,
slowly I am pulling the plate towards me. If I do it a little bit faster, it will be different results.
well, that's an indication.
Let's do
That's an indication that's probably best to figure out something else.
one more try.
See, if he uses an electric magnet on one side, okay, and has it very stationary, of course, yeah, then he can just cut the juice, and release it.
We can get as consistent results as possible.
It's really, if you tilt a little, you do a little different, it's always going to be buggy. So, the fact that it stays connected to the rubber band very well is probably good because it's got magnets smushing it. But yeah, I don't know if there's any other advantage. If you're using the same car for both tests, I guess it doesn't matter. But if you have a different magnet on different, that's not going to work.
Bear with me. No.
I forget what he's trying to prove with this experiment anyway. Oh yeah, that 1.4 thing. Okay, that a rubber band doesn't conserve momentum. Now, what springs and rubber bands obviously don't do is conserve anything. Okay, it's because you can put rubber bands on both sides and have something bounce between them, and you do get a lot of losses. Now, it appears that springs are worse. So the fact is, if you can make a rubber band just like that on both sides and make your cart less friction prone, it would be interesting to see how much the rubber band conserves. So, how much of the velocity do you get back as a reflection from that typical setup? Because it'll tell you how much you're losing each time you launch too.
Oh, it's a little bit faster. 205.
So 205, 213, 226, yeah, these aren't very consistent, so not working.
Right, just once more.
Why?
Alright, so now we have 210. So we have a certain pattern. It's it's within the range of 205 and 215, mostly. Yeah, mostly the outcomes.
Yeah, most of the outcomes. So that's how you're supposed to do it. But anyway.
Will be between those numbers. So it's pretty consistent. Now this is going to be a separate video, and I'm just wondering what you guys think about this quick release mechanism.
I think no. It's buggy prone. I mean, obviously. So it's I don't mean to cast any aspersions, but clearly it's one you could manipulate fairly easy. If you want to make it go faster, or you want to make it go slower, you have the capacity to do that. So it's a little Ouija boardy. I mean, even if you're not trying to cheat, maybe you'll be cheating. So whatever. Fine, whatever. It's nice that you thought of something, blah blah blah. It's nice to suggest things, all that kind of crap. So I don't have any complaint there. The fact that you have to do this experiment because we can't go find a physicist who's actually done it, that should be the part that surprises and amazes you. That we have to prove this elemental physics because physics hasn't done it. That should be a statement that you preface all these videos with, is saying, gee, isn't it just ludicrous that we have to do these simple elemental energy experiments because physics hasn't done any of them. It's not that they haven't done some of them, they haven't done any of them. They've never measured the friction losses. They never measure how much but you get back from a rubber band. They never measure how much you get back from a spring. They have done none of these real world experiments. All they show us is idealization math, and that's it. Nothing real world, and no proof. Because the proof isn't an idealization. The proof is going to have to be in the form of a physical real experiment where you have to understand the variables and where you're losing energy. So it's just so dishonest that these people won't admit that it is really ludicrous, silly, stupid, insane, nonsensical that something called science would spend hundreds of years dealing with energy, trying to maximize energy, and they never tested it. That should bug these people, and it doesn't. Alright, so we should be back. The Ian Gosling has done lessons for DraftScience. So now he has back to metal pendulums. So somehow for some reason, he's given up on the lever, the catapult. So he won't do the experiment I suggested, which is moving the lighter mass further out on the lever. and seeing if you can get it to rise to the 4 times the height. That the energy can in fact be transferred fairly and evenly between the objects, and so he won't do that experiment. Instead is change the game again. We're playing different, so he starts to lose at the game of soccer, he changes to football or baseball or some other game, okay? And then he pretends to cork his bat and do this bullshit to prove some point that won't be proven by his silly and chicanery, okay? And he goes to some trouble. I mean, he makes these devices and then he doesn't finish the experiments. So dropping things on the clay, he gave that up as soon as the results didn't come out his way. That's the last we saw of that. So everything will just disappear as soon as it starts to not work his way. And that's the way he works. Alright, so leave us commence.
Well, I wasn't going to do many more of these videos about this scary, but...
Oh, great. I mean, because, yeah, your heart's not in it, okay? So, yeah, give it up. You don't want to do it right. You don't want to do it fair. That's obvious. So, yeah, fuck off would be probably the right thing to do. You really don't want to pay any attention to any detail that has to do with physics. You just couldn't care about the science because you are some kind of religious kook. You're just doing your creation science stuff.
After your last one, and you were so enthusiastic about what I was saying and doing, I thought I'd carry on just for you.
Yeah, fuck you. Till dead. Soon, hope. I can only
I've
hope.
got 2 pendulum.
Oh, very exciting. You've got 2 pendulums on sticks now. They're not really classic pendulums. But go ahead. Let's play the game.
And we wanted to raise them up to different heights to get different velocities. And we wanted them to collide.
Yeah, now
Bottom dead center, say.
First problem I can just notice is I don't know how hard this steel is. It looks kind of dark and black, like it might be cast iron. That's not going to work. It has to be hard steel if you want to really make it elastic. This stuff probably doesn't bounce very well. So probably not a great choice.
The lowest point in gravity. And they were in different positions. So we wanted the one nearest me at one height and the one furthest away.
So I don't know why he's duplicating a Newton's cradle in this manner, because it's obviously got more inefficiency in it. It's got more losses because he actually does have to worry about the friction of his bearings and such. But anyway, just let him play it out. Yeah, come on.
4 heights, double the speed, and we wanted to release. No, how would we know when to release them so that they would collide at bottom dead center? Well, it's very simple.
No, I don't need this lesson. You release them from a certain height at the same time, and you know what velocity they'll have depending on how much time you're going to give them to swing. So it's the same argument as before. Distance is time in this case. The amount of distance is just providing time for something to accrue velocity before it encounters friction, the surface or whatever it is, the other thing it's going to collide with. And it's about how much time it's in the gravity will decide how much velocity it has. But obviously when you're converting this direction into that direction, that's going to cost you. But go ahead, play whatever game it is you're playing.
I'm moving that one further up. And what you do is very simple. You release them at exactly the same time.
And you do that with some special skill you have, no doubt. Okay. Brother.
And they collide at bottom dead center.
Is that what you saw? I don't know. Is that what happened? They obviously didn't collide, and they weren't very elastic, so we did all notice that. There was no bounce back. They did a lot of denting each other, apparently.
It doesn't matter where you do it from. whether this one's right up there and this one's down the bottom, or this one's right up there down the bottom, wherever you do it, release them at the same time and they collide bottom dead center. That might be helpful for your Newton's cradle experiments, because Tony was wondering when to release one to them.
Yeah, well, obviously he figured it out, didn't he? He got the right answer, right? They did collide right at the base, so that was fine.
They hit together. Now this is to do with the period of a pendulum, which is always the same, no matter what the weight of the bob. The frequency is always the same.
That's how it accrues the velocity. Yes, if it's a very short distance, it's very little velocity it gains, and if it's a high distance, it gains a lot of velocity, so it moves through the arc very quickly. So yes, that's not a news flash.
It's the same. If you change the length, the frequency alters. So because these two have got the same length and the same weight, wherever we set them off from, whatever position, whatever height, they'll collide at the lowest point of gravity at the bottom. Now this has some significance in what I was saying in my video.
No, it doesn't. I mean, your video was preposterous nonsense. You're arguing that it's not a time-dependent force by arguing that somehow the distance is deciding how much energy something has, when the distance is only indirectly related because the distance is just providing for the time. It's not how high you go above the surface that decides how much velocity you're going to get. It's about the fact that it's time. It needs time to acquire velocity. You need to free fall for an amount of time. And that's the real source of the energy. That's the contention. And you're not going to counter that contention with this nonsense. You have to go back to a gravitational argument. So again, you've ignored the argument. I've made it, I don't know, dozens of times. So I'll make it one more time right in your frickin' face and say, well, why are you evading the example that makes it clear that it has nothing to do with distance? And it has everything to do with time. So I'll do it again, because again, you're just evading the argument that's just critical to understanding it, frankly. You know, I mean, if you really want to get to the truth, sometimes you have to do more than one experiment to see, yes, it's clear, that's the way it works. So you have something that's gravitational, camera, and you're just going to measure a distance. It's going to be the same distance, okay? So everything's going to travel the same distance, and you're just going to say, well, what's the effect? If it goes slowly across that distance, it crashes. I go faster, it might get into a short orbit. And if I go a little faster, it'll just get bent and go off into space. And then I go a little bit faster, it just barely is going to get bent at all. Because this is the pressure, and this is just about how much time you're in the reign of gravity. So that's the point you have to argue. That's the one I'm saying is indestructible and be true for a billion zillion years. Is that the simple truth is gravity is working on an object per millisecond, per billionsecond. And all it is that a certain quanta of energy per billionth of a second is in fact going to hit an object's mass. So whatever its mass is, it's going to be moved based on how much mass collects the rain, how much surface it has, how much, not surface is the wrong word to use, but how many particulates of matter it has to get hit by the little tiny force bids is the real truth. But the point is, you don't have to know that real truth to know it's quite obvious, okay, that the only reasonable explanation is, yeah, distance doesn't matter. The distance isn't deciding. Okay, what's going to decide how much gravity you get affected by is how much time are you in the gravity. Period. Period. And Your claim is that it's this distance thing, and it's just based on Leibniz's misunderstanding, and that's the reason why you're doing it. You're not defending it because you know it to be true intrinsically, like somehow you've done some experiment or you've done something that shows you that distance is the truth. You just haven't. You're not willing to think about it and say, yes, well, what experiment can I show where time isn't critical, where time doesn't explicitly and always get the right answer? So if I use time, where does time fail to get the right answer about an influence of gravity? And it never fails. This is the Newtonian mechanics that NASA uses. When they say Newton, this is what they mean. Okay. That's all I can do. I mean, okay. Go ahead. Do whatever it is you're doing.
Which of course you missed the.
How could anybody get anything out of that nonsense, crap, buffoonery, silly piece of shit, absolute slop, garbage, flat earther video? It was just so bad.
You missed the point completely.
Yeah, there was no point completely. There was none. There was no point.
What was I saying? Let me just think a minute.
Yeah, go ahead and do that. It'd probably kill you.
Oh yeah. I was saying if I release this at one height, or I release it at 4 heights, makes no difference when it's falling to the time it's falling in gravity. They're both exactly the same.
And they're accruing velocity at very different rates because of the extra height. They're in the gravity and they're going to fall in that gravity. But the time element, you're denying the existence of the slope of the pendulum. So, you know, all right, here's the pen. Is it worth drawing? I mean, obviously the pendulum has a slope to it, okay? It's really vertical over here and it's really horizontal here. So short movements are just horizontal movements. Very little gravity is affecting the object because it's falling a very short distance. On the side slopes, it's a whole lot of gravity affecting the object. So that's the catch. This isn't free fall. It's a pendulum. It has different rules than free fall. All right. So I said before that it's going to take longer than its free fall path. All right, and that's because it is tied to something that's going to create more and more tension. So there's less tension when it's free falling, when it's doing the sideways, the vertical motion out here. So when it's further away, there's very little tension, very little friction. All of that stuff is very low. The friction's the highest down here because this is when the weight is really on the bearing. The bearing's feeling the full weight. Plus, this arc is so much, there's no gravity here. Okay, the gravitational difference is, what's the word to use? It's very small. And you're being held by a rigid rod. So obviously all the gravitational force is going into the rod. So that's I guess that's the way to do it. All right, so I'll illustrate it that way. So here's a lesson for you, Ian. We have to do it this way. That's the way we have to do it. Are you listening? Do you have your little I'm paying attention hat on? I'm going to pay attention. Can you pay attention? Yeah. Anyway, so when the stick is out here, you can sort of understand there's absolutely almost nothing, okay? There's no force going through the rod into the bearing. It just couldn't care less that you have something out here. It's not any weight. There's no weight here. The weight pulling this direction is almost nil, zero, nothing. When it's this way, okay, then the weight here is almost the weight of the object. It's feeling the mass of the object now, completely. All right. And so what does that mean that's happening to the force of gravity? This is essentially the same as you holding it. you're holding the mass up against gravity here, so it's not free falling. You're not holding it up against gravity here, so it is free falling. So here, the amount of free fall, okay, is very high. Here, the amount of free fall is very low, okay, because, minus sign, however to distinguish it. Okay, you're doing very little free falling here because you're tied to a thing that's holding the weight. That's the same thing as it hitting the ground in a sense. The pressure that gravity's producing is going right up this stick and right into this bearing. That's where all the energy's going. So just like when it's held in your hand, all the energy that gravity is creating, the velocity, is going into your hand is pushing back up, and that's the end of the story. This thing can't gain any velocity. It can't go anywhere because there's a force, okay, the earth, pushing up against it. Here there's a force, pulling's the, kind of a bullshit word, but anyway, preventing it from free falling. So here there's lots of friction, you could argue, very little friction out here. That's the distinction. Are you educated?
And I got you there. That was another moment for your 4 times the height, 2 times the velocity. Despite all your protestation.
Right, so he keeps saying pendulums are the same as free fall. I keep saying pendulums aren't free fall, so this analogy is useless. I wasn't talking about pendulums, I wasn't talking about any kind of mechanical device. I was talking about, strictly speaking, lifting things up and down, okay, whether you're lifting it or whether you're dropping it. Those two events are the same thing. So if I give something the same velocity, it hits the ground. If I give it back exactly the same velocity, it'll reach exactly the same height at which it was left from. That's proven physics. So, really the conversation is just about what's creating that velocity, and is it time or is it distance? And clearly it's time in the force. Now you're doing something where you're going to break the amount of friction you're going to place on the free falling object. You're going to change how much friction you're going to apply to it. You're going to apply heavy friction to the things at the bottom and very little friction to the things at the top. And that's the distinction.
So if I release it from there, or release it from
besides
up there,
the fact it has
the same time to get to the bottom.
Right, and as I said in the video yesterday, the time isn't going to be the same as the free fall time. So it's not the same experiment. You want to pretend it's free fall? It's not. It's clearly completely obstructed fall, in the sense that you can even understand these heavy bars that you have it connected to are also part of the weight that it's feeling here at the bottom. The fulcrum isn't feeling, when you have it out here, what's it feeling? What part of the weight is it feeling? At best, it's feeling half the weight, okay, before you release it. But once you release it, it's feeling almost nothing.
You just proved with the pendulums colliding. So, according to you, if gravity is a time-dependent force, they're both...
Okay, so I said this yesterday. It's a time-dependent force, but obviously every time you apply any friction to it, you're changing how much time it's going to be in the gravity. And what happens to that energy? It has to go somewhere. So in this experiment, you're creating a bunch of extra energy. Okay, and it's going to be measured in that fulcrum. So that's where you're going to find it. That's why the bearing gets more and more important. The more mass you put on this pendulum and the more rigid you make it, the more energy you're losing to your fulcrum.
In time, if I released it from there, or released it from there, they're both in gravity the same amount of time. They both got the same weight, so they both should have the same force.
No, they shouldn't. So, again, and for the logical reason, obviously the slope of the circle is very vertical out here, and it's very horizontal here. And what is creating that difference? The friction. This is very high friction. This is very low friction.
Well, of course they bloody don't, do they? This one, the higher it is, got a lot more force. But it's the same time in gravity falling.
So you can keep saying it, okay, but that's not the experiment. It's not the same time because the friction is different. It's not in the same friction. So this is just like the rolling something 4 times as fast with twice the velocity. If the friction changes, then the amount of energy the object keeps changes. The faster something's going, the more energy it keeps. So in this case, the high velocity that the thing traveling the further distance, it gains all the high velocity without any friction. And then it gains almost no velocity at the bottom because the friction is absorbing all of it.
Same time it's exposed to the gravity, Gary. Here, there, doesn't matter, same time. Get it?
No. So again, you really think it's honest. You're making a counter. I'm arguing free fall. Obviously pendulums are controlled fall. Obviously being controlled by the fact that the weight of the object completely changes. That is, how much energy goes to the fulcrum completely changes depending on what angle it's falling at. So that's just a fact, and you're saying this is the same experiment. You don't see how that's bullshit.
Right. You can have that for free. Next little thing you say.
You can have it shot right back up your ass, fuckhead.
Say the end of my stick is a person. These weights are a cloud of rain. And the end of my stick is a person going under.
There's no point, right? This is too stupid. It's really too stupid, right? He's making a gravity argument that these two things have enough gravity to what? Move your stick? Oh, Jesus, what an idiot.
Beneath. The faster I go under the cloud, you say, the less rain will hit on me. Quite right. But of course that's got nothing to do with the analogy of gravity.
It has everything to do with it. It's an argument you're not going to counter, so there's no way for you to counter the argument. In fact, if gravity was made out of little particles that were coming at you from one side than the other side, it would duplicate the idea of getting wet perfectly. The amount you collect will be dependent on how much time you're exposed to the bullets. So if there were bullets, it's a gun firing bullets. I got a bunch of machine guns firing bullets. Theoretically, you go fast enough, none of the bullets hit you. All right? You go really slow, lots of bullets hit you. You're not going to undo that analogy. It's perfect. It works. And there's not going to be any experiment that you'll ever conduct where you'll demonstrate it doesn't work as an explanation. Every single experiment you can do, I can just draw the rain in and show where it is, and then I can just explain in this case, right, there's a constant amount of rain coming down, but clearly over here the object gets to keep the wetness when it's falling over here, and it doesn't get to keep any of it down here. Big difference. The wet goes right up the stick into the bearing.
Gravity's not just a cloud of gravity, is it? These weights.
Yeah, it always is.
Continuous line of.
It is always a cloud. So he doesn't understand that a planet doesn't make gravity forever sideways this way and this way and this way. No, it's one little contained ball of gravity, moron. Just as I drew it. So he doesn't think the planet has gravity around its edges that creates a field of gravity. He thinks it goes on infinity. No, it doesn't. The production of it is not infinite. All right, the bits of force are, but not the production.
Great weights forever around the circumference of the Earth.
Right, and
so although I'll go very.
So the drawing was clearly as the distance was the whole circumference of the Earth. It was a fixed amount of gravity. It's always the same amount of gravity. The part where you're a little bit further away on the edges, they account for each other, so it's always the same for anything traveling that distance, always gets hit with the same amount of gravity per second. And that's the point. Per second, it's exactly the same amount of gravity.
Quickly in a second, I'll do a lot more distance in that second. I'm continually in the stream of gravity. I'm continually in the rain, if you like.
So, obvious bullshit. So obviously the further away you get from a spherical body, you know, on the fringes it's even more distance, but it doesn't matter. There's a set. I mean, do I really have to draw it again? He's this fucking stupid? Oh, god damn it. You just say, oh, no, he can't be this dumb. Oh, good, I didn't have the video on. It'll save me some trouble. Jesus Christ. Moron. Alright, there it is again. So here's your, it doesn't matter whether I make this the distance, or I make this the distance, or I make this the distance. Doesn't matter. Okay, this is always going to be the same amount of gravity per second here. This pathway. Same amount of force will go through this gate. Through this gate, the same amount of gravity per second goes through. Through this gate, the same amount of gravity per second goes through. Doesn't matter. It's constant. For a billion years, it'll always be the same. Blah, 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 blah. Alright, so the amount of force, the amount of bullets being fired is always the same. And all you're saying is, here's a set distance that I'm going to be going through the bullets. Okay, that's the fact of it. Okay, so gravity, unlike light, it's not coming out, it's going in. So the point is the bullets are coming from the outside. Okay, but it doesn't really matter for the analogy. And the simple argument is that the thing that's going to control how many times you get hit by a bullet and moved, okay, is completely going to be decided by how much time you take to traverse the field that the bullets are in. You'll never defeat that argument. You'll never defeat that explanation, because it's absolutely accurate. It absolutely fits. It's exactly what gravity is in fact doing, and you can't change it. Einstein understood this. Every physicist understands that's exactly how it works. So there's nothing you're arguing here that you can win. It's not an argument you can win. No chance. Hello. Please behave. Thank you.
I'm travelling further. I never get out of the rain. I just run into more rain. So your analogy of going quickly past the rain cloud falls down when we realise that the gravity is not a cloud, it's a continual circumference of gravity.
And it's always producing exactly the same for any area, any square meter. It's the same amount of sunlight coming into the earth. I have the earth, I'm sitting here, I just cut a square meter of atmosphere, all right, at any certain location. And that square meter will always have the same amount of light technically coming through it. I mean, close enough. There's no change. And you're just saying how much, that's a constant amount of bullets. It's always the same number of bullets that are going through that window. You're just saying how fast you're going across the window. If it was a radioactive element and there was a lead and you had a little opening in there, the same amount of radiation is coming out. It's always the same amount. And the simple argument is the quicker you go across the radiation, the less radioactive you become. Duh. I mean, fucking duh.
We move around the Earth. We do 2 laps of the Earth in a second, or 10 laps of the Earth in a second, or a quarter of a lap of the Earth in a second. We're still in the gravity all the time, and we.
So again, this lapping thing doesn't have anything to do with the analogy. So, fuck you again. And real orbits aren't. You don't get into orbits easily. So again, orbits are complicated. You have to have your velocity changed to get into an orbit. You can't get into an orbit without your velocity being changed. There's no external way to enter into an orbit without you having your velocity reduced.
Check the same gravity, no matter how fast we go. Hey up, you bugger. Up, you bloody learnt something, you daft.
So, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you. Yeah, you teach bad, okay? You bad, you bad. So it's just pitiful, really, because yes, he might deceive somebody with this nonsense. These nonsense examples where he ignores all the real variables and pretends, okay, that a fixed body like the Earth doesn't radiate exactly the same amount of what you could call gravitational pressure, doesn't produce the same amount of gravitational pressure consistent over any distance. Make the distance longer, yes, there'll be more gravity over the longer distance, but per foot it always is the same amount of gravity. You're not going to change how open the window is. You're not going to change how many bullets the gun fires over that distance. So, well, just, this is such an obnoxious piece of scum. Alright. Again, it's your epitaph. What are you demonstrating? You really think you're going to win this argument? You're going to prove that that somehow gravity cares about how many feet you're falling, how much distance you moved. So again, I could use the 500 mile an hour bullet coming in. Something moving already 500 miles an hour enters gravity. It's not going to gain, okay, by distance, because it's moving really fast. It's going to travel a lot of distance. But in that time, in that distance, it's only going to be in the gravity a very short time, and it's only going to gain, if it's in 1 second, it'll gain 9.8. So it'll be going 500, 9.8. But if I drop something from exactly the same location as I decide to time the other thing from, it could take it 10 seconds to accrue its velocity, and it will gain from the velocity 100 meters per second velocity. So one only gains 9, the other one gains 100. Clearly not the same for the same distance traveled. Clearly distance isn't deciding how much energy you collect. The time you're in the gravity decides how much energy you collect. God damn it. Too stupid. Again, I don't even think he's arguing what most physics believe. I think most physicists know, yeah, it's a time-dependent force.
Twat.
Fuckhead. Jackass. Mother molester. Whatever. Alright. So yeah, that's probably enough. It's probably worth talking a little bit. I mean, I don't want to make a separate video for it because I really have to dissect the video more completely. But the Brozo experiment that the Walker guy brought up, I mean, it's just so intrinsically not clean in the sense that you're measuring more than one, you have more than one variable in the experiment, and there's really like 3 variables, which is, makes it even more interesting. So he has a cart that has very heavy wheels. All right, they're disc drives. Okay, so we know that if the cart's moving, it's going to have a bunch of what's called angular momentum in the parts that are going round. Okay, so there's a bunch of angular momentum that has to be taken from whatever you push it with. So if you push it with a spring, part of the energy isn't going to be doing this. Part of the energy is doing this. Okay, so that's a big difference right there. So you're consuming some portion of the force you're applying is going here. Some portion will be in the fact that the object itself is moving in this direction. Alright. And so then the idea is it's going to bounce it off another spring. Okay. Now what happens when it hits the other spring? Well, this motion is going to be kind of clear. The spring can collect that one really easily. Okay, this linear motion. But the angular motion is a real problem because it has to reverse that. Okay, so it's got stuff spinning this way and it's going to change it to clockwise, from clockwise to counterclockwise. So you can sort of understand that that's going to require, first you have to apply a stopping motion through this object into the wheel. So somehow you have to make the wheel stop. So that's when the ground's going to have to get involved, right? Because you're going to have to create some way to stop the wheel from turning. So the fact is that once the car stops and the wheel continues to turn, the ground has to stop the wheel from going one way, and then it has to use again the pushing force this way. It has to use friction again to start the wheels turning again. So it's a huge amount of loss every transition. So as the car is bouncing back and forth, the amount of friction with the ground in terms of rolling, that is when it's when it's doing the rolling part here in the middle, we're just rolling along. Car is very efficient, but it's very inefficient when it has to change direction. So at the two sides where it's changing direction, so you have low friction here, no real problem, you're not draining a bunch of energy. But every time you stop and start, you're draining a lot of energy because you have to change the rotation of the wheels, and you're not doing it through the bearing, you have to do it through the surface. So that's just where you're leaking force, is every single time you reverse the direction, the wheels are going to cost you a lot. So it's not just a matter of compressing the spring at a constant rate either. So just understand, when you hit the spring, this is going to have a nice linear deceleration, but the deceleration of the wheels, that is the conversion of the angular momentum, is going to show up later. It's not going to show up at the same time. So you can sort of understand that the pressure isn't going to be a consistent deceleration or a consistent pushing of the spring. And so there's all kinds of room to lose force getting it into the spring. So overall, the spring is what you're measuring by the experiment. You're measuring the efficiency of the springs. You're not measuring how much the traveling distance is taking out of the object. You're measuring how well the springs deal with the momentum. And the momentum he gave the objects to start with is clearly not twice the velocity. And, so that's why you could just fiddle with this experiment all over the place and change the results, because there's more than one variable in the experiment. So enough said for today, I guess, and so till the next time, and such and so forth and whatnot. Ugh.